The flight from New York to Los Angeles today was a different experience for Martin compared to the first-class flights he had taken before. As a successful businessman, he saw this as an opportunity to relax, temporarily set work aside, and indulge in the luxury of this class. However, things did not go as he had expected. Martin was a highly accomplished entrepreneur in the financial sector, and although he was not easily impressed by famous faces, the moment he boarded the Boeing 747, he couldn't help but notice the man sitting in the row ahead of him. Musk stood out not just because of his minimalist attire, but also due to a particular detail that Martin couldn't overlook: the multi-million-dollar Patek Philippe watch on Elon Musk's wrist. Martin recalled seeing Musk wearing that very same watch at a technology conference, a distinctive marker that confirmed the man's identity. If that wasn't enough, when the flight attendant called his name to confirm his meal selection, the name Musk left no room for doubt. This was indeed one of the world's most renowned investors and billionaires. Martin felt a mix of surprise and curiosity. While his skepticism toward Musk's immense wealth and power still dominated his thoughts, he couldn't deny that the billionaire's choice to take a commercial flight rather than a private jet was unusual. This both annoyed and intrigued him. To Martin, a man like Musk should always maintain an air of exclusivity, not sit among ordinary passengers on a regular flight. He wondered, was Musk merely putting on a facade of humility? Or was there something deeper behind this simplicity? The curiosity within him began to grow. In the end, Martin could no longer hold back. As the flight attendant served the meal, he overheard Musk casually remark, "Actually, I don't really need this meal. I just want to try airline food to see what it's really like." That sentence hit Martin like a slap. To him, it reeked of condescension, as if ordinary people like himself were nothing more than tools for the satisfaction of others. He couldn't help but wonder, did Musk even understand the struggles that people faced in their daily lives? Unable to contain himself any longer, Martin decided to speak up. He set his sights on Musk, determined to call him out in front of everyone. Without thinking about the consequences, he stood up and walked toward the billionaire. His voice was filled with emotion, but he didn't care about the curious stares of the surrounding passengers. "You know," Martin said, his tone sharp, "sometimes people like you make me feel like I'm just part of a world full of hypocrites and complacent." The tension in the air was palpable, yet Martin remained focused solely on Musk. But Musk? He just sat there calm, silent, completely unfazed. Musk, the famous and powerful man, sat in silence across from Martin, showing not a hint of anger despite the public insult. In fact, his silence only made the tension rise even further for Martin. But instead of reacting or expressing displeasure, Musk simply took a sip of water and continued to observe his surroundings. His calm demeanor acted like an invisible shield, deflecting the weight of the harsh words thrown at him. Martin began to sense that this silence was not a lack of response, but rather a deliberate strategy away for Musk to assert that he did not need to dignify reckless words with a reaction. A few seconds later, Musk slowly turned to Martin, his gaze not one of irritation, but of composure, as if he had encountered situations like this countless times before. "Your words won't change the way I think," Musk said, his voice steady. At that moment, Martin realized that Musk's silence was not weakness, but absolute confidence in himself, something Martin couldn't help but admire. The entire cabin seemed to quiet down. The surrounding passengers had begun paying attention to the exchange between Martin and Musk, yet no one spoke. The air was thick with tension. Martin tried to shake off the growing unease within him, reassuring himself that he had only spoken his mind, and that the man across from him couldn't possibly remain unaffected by his words. The flight continued, but Martin found himself unable to think about anything else. A part of him wanted to forget the whole encounter, yet another part couldn't stop replaying Musk's response in his mind. Suddenly, just as the meal service was ending, a voice came from behind him. "Hello, Martin." Startled, Martin turned toward the sound. A flight attendant stood at the end of the aisle, not holding food or drinks, but rather a simple folder. "I'm sorry, but there's an issue that needs to be addressed," the attendant said, looking directly at Martin. A sense of unease rose within Martin. Before he could open his mouth, the flight attendant continued, We have just received information from operations regarding some matters related to you. There are a few points we need to clarify. Martin frowned, feeling a wave of anxiety. What is this about? He asked, his voice laced with suspicion. The flight attendant nodded, glanced at the folder in his hands, then looked back at Martin with a serious expression. Actually, this is not just an ordinary commercial flight. Haven't you realized that the man sitting on this plane is one of the primary investors in the major project your company just signed a contract for? Martin froze. The words hit him like a sudden blow, shaking him to his core. He turned back toward Elon Musk, who remained still, gazing out the window, his face unreadable. Martin had no idea that Musk was involved in such a critical project his company was working on. A stinging realization washed over him. It felt as though he had just been slapped in the face. The world around him seemed to blur and spin, turning into a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. We regret to inform you, the flight attendant continued in a low, deliberate tone. But perhaps you should reconsider the words you just said. Heat rushed to Martin's face as the weight of the moment sank in. He had not only insulted a major figure in the industry, but also someone who held direct influence over his own business. A deep sense of shock and embarrassment coursed through his entire body. The cabin around him seemed to shrink, the silence stretching unbearably thick. There were no more sounds, only the crushing tension pressing down on him. Martin tried to remain composed, but his body betrayed his unease. A wave of anxiety coursed through him, making him feel as though he had just made an irreversible mistake. He hadn't just insulted a famous figure, he had jeopardized a crucial business relationship. Elon Musk still sat there, unmoved, unbothered. He continued gazing out the window as if the entire exchange had been of no significance to him. Martin looked at Musk's face, searching for a sign, anything that might help him gauge the situation or offer a way to salvage it. But there was nothing. Musk remained silent, composed almost as if he had seen this scenario play out countless times before. Elon Musk's silence caused Martin to feel increasingly embarrassed. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, Martin stood up and walked briskly toward Musk. He was fully aware of the possible consequences, but a part of him knew he had to apologize. He had to do something to make up for his misstep. As he approached, Musk remained still, his gaze unchanging. Martin's voice faltered, losing the confidence he had displayed earlier. He apologized in a softer tone, admitting that he had no idea how much Musk would affect his company, and acknowledging that what he had said earlier was a mistake. He was truly sorry. For the first time since their meeting began, Musk turned to look at Martin. His eyes were calm, neither rushed nor angry. There was just an odd serenity, as if he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Musk said it was okay and that sometimes people needed a lesson to realize what was truly important. Martin could only stand there in silence. Musk's words struck a blow to his self-esteem, making him feel suddenly small, like a pawn in a game he had inadvertently created. Sinking back into his seat, Martin felt his thoughts spiral. It turned out that what he had done wasn't just a communication blunder, it was something deeper, a realization, a reckoning with himself that he had never faced before. Elon Musk, the man he had scoffed at, was no longer just a powerful figure in the tech world. He was someone who, in an instant, could alter the very course of Martin's career. A moment of silence passed between them. Though Musk said nothing more, Martin could feel the shift in the air. It wasn't Musk's fame or power that weighed on him. It was something deeper, something Martin had never considered before. Musk didn't need to speak. His silence and composure conveyed everything. Martin wondered if his apology had been enough. It felt as if he were sinking into a pit with no way out. If he had once prided himself on being in control of every situation, he now realized he was nothing more than a pawn in a game of his own making. As the weight of shame settled over him, something unexpected happened. Musk, still seated calmly, casually spoke to the flight attendant, but not about Martin. "Another cup of coffee, please?" His voice was calm and showed no trace of agitation. Martin looked up, and in that brief moment, a sudden thought struck him. Things are not always as they appear. Musk might wield immense influence, but he was not invulnerable, nor was he beyond learning from others. What Martin had done was not just an insult to Musk, it was a reflection of his own arrogance and thoughtlessness. A new realization began to take root in Martin's mind. This encounter was not just a challenge, it was an opportunity, a chance to reassess himself. He understood now that he didn't need to prove his worth by confronting others. He didn't need to be someone else. True respect and composure were far more valuable than prideful defiance. Musk continued conversing with the flight attendant, calm and unbothered, as if nothing had happened. There was no sign that Martin's words had wounded him. Strangely, this gave Martin a sense of relief. He told himself, just a lesson in humility, in respecting others, and, more importantly, in owning up to one's mistakes. Martin stood up and apologized to Musk, though the words caught in his throat, the lingering shame still weighing heavily on him. Musk did not rush to respond. His expression remained composed, unaffected. But it was not complete silence. After a long pause, Musk met Martin's gaze not with anger, but with a quiet sigh. Then, in a deep, measured voice, he said, "Words can wound, but sometimes they also reveal the truth about ourselves. I don't need your apology, Martin. I only hope that you've learned something from this experience." Musk's words hit Martin like a shockwave. It wasn't blunt criticism that unsettled him, it was the sheer composure of the man in front of him. There was no outburst, no retaliation, only a calm response that carried more weight than any sharp remark ever could. It was as if Musk had encountered countless situations like this before, and understood that sometimes silence and unwavering composure were the most powerful ways to deal with ignorance. As the plane began its descent into Los Angeles, the atmosphere in the cabin felt lighter. Yet for Martin, it felt as though he had just been through a journey far longer than the flight from New York to Los Angeles. This was more than just a trip, it was an encounter with himself, an unexpected turning point he had never anticipated. Even though he had apologized to Musk, the initial anxiety over his impulsive actions had not completely faded. Regret still clung to him, but Martin realized something important: mistakes, no matter how uncomfortable, were often the greatest opportunities for learning and growth. Everyone stumbles at some point, but what truly matters is how they choose to face and correct their missteps. As the plane touched down, passengers began preparing to disembark. Martin stole one last glance at Musk. The man remained composed, showing no signs of irritation or resentment. A faint, almost imperceptible smile crossed Musk's lips as he stood up, ready to leave the cabin. There was nothing unusual about the way he departed, just a natural movement, as if the brief disruption of their encounter had left no lasting impression on him. Martin felt a slight sense of relief, but he also knew that things would never be the same again. He had learned an important lesson that arrogance only leads to downfall, while humility and the ability to acknowledge one's mistakes are what truly make a person stronger and wiser. With these thoughts in mind, Martin stepped out of the cabin, looking around and feeling as though the world had suddenly become bigger, no longer confined by his own prejudices and self-importance. He didn't know if he would ever cross paths with Musk again, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that he had changed. And that was the first step towards self-improvement. As he exited the airport and merged into the bustling crowds of Los Angeles, a strange feeling washed over him. It wasn't the fatigue of a long journey, it was the realization that he needed change, that he was standing at the edge of a turning point in his life. Though the flight had ended, thoughts of Musk, his unshaken composure in the face of everything, continued to linger in Martin's mind. Musk was not just a powerful figure in the industry, he was someone who could remain steady, no matter the challenge. And that made Martin wonder, could he too learn something from that unwavering calm? As he left the airport, Martin made a decision, one he had never dared to make before. He no longer wanted to protect his ego, nor did he want to live behind the arrogant facade he had built for himself. Instead of continuing to construct walls around him, he chose to open up, to face his mistakes, and to learn from them. Back at the company, he tried to throw himself into his work, but everything felt strangely dull. A few days later, during a meeting with business partners, Martin realized that his old sense of self-importance still lingered. The act of truly admitting his mistakes had not yet fully integrated into his actions. It wasn't until he faced a difficult decision, one where he had no choice but to listen to his colleagues' opinions rather than impose his own, that he truly grasped the value of humility. Over the following days, this change began to seep into his attitude and the way he interacted with others. But it wasn't an instant transformation. It was a slow, challenging process. A process in which Martin had to confront the very ego that had once held back his growth. People around him started to notice the change. No one spoke about it directly, but the atmosphere in the office felt lighter, as if everyone understood that a real shift had taken place. Martin began to see the difference in how people interacted with him. Meetings were no longer just about numbers and business results. They became discussions about personal growth, about facing challenges and overcoming failures. He felt the transformation within himself. As each workday became easier, not a constant battle between ego and personal gain, but a chance to engage with others with openness and sincerity. He didn't know if he would ever meet Elon Musk again, but one thing was certain: the lesson of humility, change, and the courage to face oneself would stay with him for the rest of his life.